Hello, Spencerville Church. I hope that you are having a great week thus far. It is Tuesday morning, and I am doing a sermon debrief off of my sermon last week. Pastor Jason and I talked about this and thought it might be good for me to do a couple more things through video, and so I wanted to do a sermon debrief about my sermon from last week. I introduced this idea that I hope that we will move towards small groups within our church family. And again, someone can call that small groups, someone can call that cell groups. Pioneer Memorial Church calls them growth groups. Ellen White refers to them as small companies. Whatever you want to call them, I don't really care. But the idea is how to have smaller, more intentional community within the larger body of the church. This isn't something that just popped into my head during COVID, but God has done some things during our pandemic that have convicted my heart of my need to be willing to do this very hard thing, because really taking a church and moving us in the direction of small groups is a very difficult thing. In fact, I would say that probably Pastor Gaspar would have appreciated it if I had done this when he was a pastor here, when he was still working here. In fact, he sent me a text message Sabbath after my sermon. I don't think he'd mind you saying, "Chad, thank you for that landmark sermon," in all capital letters and 4 exclamation marks. I know that he really cares about the value and desire wanted small groups at our church. Pastor Candace, since she got here, has been talking to me about small groups and has brought it up in multiple conversations. Richard Goulden, our head elder, has talked to me about small groups recently within our search committee for a youth pastor. There has been the expressed desire of seeing stronger small groups at all ages, but especially there within the middle school, even late elementary school on up. So I've been having many voices talking to me about the desire for small groups within the context of our church. And COVID, as I said in my sermon, shined a spotlight on this need. Now, I have to repent because really I know the value of small groups, and I've had a lot of experience actually with small groups and small group ministry. When I was at seminary, Pastor Esther Knott uh, mentored me in small groups. I was part of the very first initiative at Pioneer Memorial Church for small groups, and now I think they have over 100 small groups there at Pioneer Memorial Church, or maybe even a couple hundred there at Pioneer. And it was an early initiative that Dwight and Pastor Dwight and Pastor Esther were trying to get going, and I kind of nosed my way in, and Christy and I were put into a small group, and then we, of course, led small groups after we were in that initial small group as well. Then in the first church that I ever served at, my senior pastor there asked me to lead and head up small groups, and so we started a small group initiative at that church. And then when I was in California, we had small groups. We started small groups, and we actually did those. They were called sermon-based small groups. In other words, I would preach, and then there would be an outline from that sermon in which people could discuss during the week some aspects of the small group. So I've had a lot of familiarity with small groups, but when I came here, we had our strong Sabbath schools, and we were so busy with other things. And honestly, small groups are just challenging, and I didn't know if I wanted to have that battle, I guess you could say. And also I realized how busy everyone was, and do I really want to add one more thing? But it's become very apparent how much we need this. And beyond Pastor Gaspar's text to me on Sabbath after my sermon, a number of other people who normally don't contact me contacted me just saying, "Thank you. We've been wanting this for a long time," uh, and so I hope that means that there's some motivation behind it. But I want to debrief specifically about my sermon, Sabbath, so that you would understand a little bit more about where I was coming from in regards to some of the things I said. First of all, I wanted to address specifically, I made a comment that I would love, the vision that I have is that we are a church that does not have committees and ministries. And I specifically mentioned evangelism, even prayer, intercessory prayer committee, men's ministries, women's ministries. Uh, uh, I think I mentioned community services. And I want to further expound on what I was saying with that statement, or with that little section of the sermon. And what I was saying was this, is that a lot of those ministries exist, and they exist in the form in which they are in, because people see that folks are not connected. They're not being cared for. They're not being taken care of. They're not being looked after maybe the way they should. And so we have women's ministries to try to minister to women, and we have men's ministries to try to minister to men, and we have evangelism because we feel like we have to have a program or something in order to bring people into the church, and we have intercessory prayer committee because not everybody is interceding for everybody else, and so we feel like we need to create a committee for that, and and we have community services because not everyone is naturally reaching out, so we have to create programs in which we try to get the people to go out and to minister to the community. And all these ministries are necessary and appreciated and doing good things within the context that we are in. But I believe that all of those things would be more efficient and would happen on a larger scale, even if it was done through the context of small group ministry. Let me give you a quick example. Uh, Say we have 10 small groups, right? Let's just say we have 10 small groups of 10 people each. That's 100 people. And say there was a need, there was a community need, there was something in community services that we needed to do. If I got up front and said something about that need, it is likely, in fact, we know it's true because we've actually experienced it at our church, that nowhere near 100 people would come to help with that initiative. But if, say, 10 small group leaders got together and said, hey, let's be a part of this, and then they individually went back to their small groups and said, let's take this initiative, it is likely, psychologically even, we understand this, it is likely that the majority of those group members would join and be a part of that initiative. Why? Because now it's no longer about a call from the front or everyone's doing it, but now it's about the relationships that I have within my small group. And suddenly you go from begging people to be involved in some sort of ministry to people doing it with ease. This is the way things work. We think about another example I could give you of a real life example that I could give you right now is that a member who was sick, we as a church reached out to say, okay, what can we do to set up some things for them in preparation for major surgery that this individual was having. And what we found out is that that person already had meals and there was a meal train and everything lined up for that individual. Why? How did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, it's because this person is in a small group. They're in a women's small group, and that women's small group on their own had taken that initiative to set things up for this lady, even beyond their small group. That is the value of small groups, that we went to help her, and she was already being helped. She was already being cared for. She was already being taken care of because of this small group. There are people that are not connected to a small group, and then they get lost in the shuffle, and that does not happen. But there's a relationship built in, and so this already is taking place. We have ministries because we try to program and plan events for various things. The ministries are needed, again, in our current context, but wouldn't we say, just imagine this, wouldn't we say that if people only have 1 or 2 hours a week extra, do we want them as a part of a committee or a part of a singular event to be giving that time? Or would we say we want those people to be, for that 1 hour a week, in a group where they're studying together, where they're praying with others, where they're interceding for others, where they're holding one another accountable, maybe where they're doing some ministry service projects together, all within the context of this group. Isn't that a more efficient thing if that's happening on a weekly basis than someone saying, well, I'm involved in this committee to plan for this event? We would say that the former is preferred over the latter. It doesn't mean that the latter is bad. It just means that the former is strong. I think of one of the strongest ministries actually out of men's ministry. And years ago, Paul, one of the men's ministry leaders, he started Monday Night Football Bible study. And Paul has a group of individuals that consistently come to that small group. They eat pizza together, they study the Bible together, and then they watch a little football. They don't even watch the whole game. They usually go home before the game's over. But they eat, they watch, they study, and then they watch, and they know each other, they enjoy each other's company. It's a connecting point. That is the value of a small group. And that ministry is something that has sustained in ministries when other things have not sustained as much. That one has sustained. Why? Because there's a relationship, there's a consistency built within that little community, that little group. These are the values of small groups. It's not that the other does not have value or that it's not appreciated. It's just a saying, there's things that are good, but what is the best way? Ellen White's statement, remember what she said? She said, "It has been shown to me by one who cannot err that in large churches," and again, large churches at that time were 50, 60, 70, 100 people. In large churches, people should come together in small companies, not only to care for each other, but to care for those outside. They should support, they should encourage, they should do ministry together. That's what she said, her counsel, the prophetic counsel from one who cannot err. Her guidance wasn't, hey, the best way to do ministry is to have a big event. Her guidance was, in a big church, the best way to do ministry by one who cannot err, God himself, is to do it in smaller gatherings, smaller groups. And so when we talked about that, when I made that statement about, I see a church with no committees, it was addressing specifically saying that there is good, but there is the best. And it's not because something is not appreciated. It's not because something within our current structure, we need those things. But if we had a church where almost everybody was in a community of support, and then those community supports at times, whether on their own or with other community support, said, okay, we're going to go out and do evangelism, or we're going to go out and do some community service work, where those groups are constantly praying for each other, where those groups, hey, there's a group of people and someone in the group is having a baby. Okay, everybody rallies around and invites other people within the church. It's no longer about a committee or an event, but now it is the people owning it themselves. It also is no longer then about managing the calendar. One of the biggest squabbles that we have in the church is people getting frustrated with this calendar thing being open and this calendar thing being open and this calendar. It's one of the reasons why the pastors seem to be dictating and dominating things, because we have to manage the various frustrations of people because everybody seems like they're competing for the same group of people. Well, if it's no longer about that big gathering, but now it's about just that community, just the 10, 15, 20 people maybe within your group going to do something, then everybody shows up and everybody does the work together. And it's no longer about, do I have to coordinate with this calendar or this event or that event, but it's now about, we're all doing ministry. And we're doing ministry in our group and that group's doing ministry. It just seems like we should listen to the one who cannot err. So that's my sermon debrief for today, and I hope that you are blessed by it. One of my sons just came in, so I'm getting ready to be interrupted. And I pray that you're having a great week. And I'm going to sermon debrief after next Sabbath as well. God bless you all. Love you and praying for you. Bye bye.